You are listening to part 2 of Who Killed Kelly on The Vault.
I got a phone call. I suppose that day I went outside and screamed. They said she drowned, but they suspected foul play because one of her shoes was over here and one was over there. So she put up a struggle. Grass was all matted down and could tell there was a struggle. Definitely. She was mighty.
It was just so fishy, that it was such a dead end and nobody knew anything. But it seems like all of these people knew plenty.
These women, had alleged that they warned one another about you, to not go with you in your blue vehicle.
Okay.
And they described these stickers on the window, for sale stickers.
It would be nice to have some of the answers, that we're seeking out, to bring that part of the justice. I don't want anything more to do with this. This is ridiculous. This was 40-something years ago. The guy was 6'3".
He was 6 foot.
If anybody knows something, say something.
In the weeks after Kelly was found dead, investigators were zeroing in on Donald, the notorious car salesman. Without him knowing, they parked outside the dealership where he worked and took photos of him. After developing the film, they took those images to the 2 witnesses who saw Kelly leave the Frontier Bar on May 26th with an unknown man driving a 2-door blue car. They started with the first witness, Darlene. She was shown 8 photos. Donald's driver's license photo and the image of him from afar were included. Yet, she chose 2 other photos of the same man, number 4 and number 6. They more closely resembled the person she saw. Next, they went to witness 2, Nick. Same thing. He picked the 2 photos of the same man Darlene had chosen, number 4 and number 6. Before we move forward, I want to talk about these witnesses. Darlene and Nick were critical, the cornerstone of the investigation into Kelly's murder. Nowhere in the police file did it indicate agents didn't trust them, or that they weren't reliable. Yet, in a 1997 newspaper article about Kelly in the Argus Leader, this is how BCA agent Bob Berg was quoted. The problem we have is the individuals are not the best witnesses. I totally believe they saw her getting into a vehicle. My question is, how accurate is that information? Now, when I received the investigative file, I had already read through every article written about Kelly, dating back to 1984. And I did recall Agent Berg being quoted as saying that. Yet, again, I could not find anything in the file that would indicate he was feeling that way at the time, in '84. They never even talked to Donald again after Darlene and Nick did not pick him out of that photo lineup. Surely there was some trust, a lot of trust. I might have an idea of why he said that more than a decade later, though. There are 2 possible reasons. 1, in the 1997 article, Agent Berg and a member of the Sioux Falls Police Department said they had a pretty good idea of who killed Kelly. They just couldn't prove it. A serial rapist who was behind bars in Sioux Falls for more than 200 years, as in his sentence was more than 200 years in prison. He was never charged with murder, though, but he did plead guilty to multiple counts of rape. South Dakota takes sexual assault cases very seriously. Again, having read this article many times over before receiving the file, I was eager to read the file to find out more. But there was hardly anything. He was never even named as a potential suspect. The file included information on the known crimes he had committed, but he wasn't questioned about Kelly. There was no effort to find out where he was on May 26th through 28th. No description of the car he drove, and no information about any connection to Laverne. Referencing law enforcement, the article from 1997 stated that the rapist's wife said she saw cockleburrs on him on May 27th, 1984. But there is no interview with her in the file, no mention of cockleburrs. Agent Berg said he had a gut feeling that this was their guy, though. So one could theorize that they thought, well, there was a violent guy roaming the streets of Sioux Falls at the time Kelly was killed. It could have been him. And because of that, they could have dismissed the eyewitness accounts in Kelly's case. And here's why they could have made sense of the dismissal. When you go back to the first interviews with Darlene and Nick, there are key differences in their descriptions. Nick says the guy was white, in his 20s, roughly 6 feet tall with short brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a red nylon jacket, similar to the one Kelly was wearing. Nick was adamant about the description of the car. A blue Ford Torino-looking vehicle with a white stripe down the side. Darlene said the guy was a white guy, about 5'11" with a medium build, brown hair, wearing dark dress pants and a red nylon jacket, similar to the one Kelly was wearing. As for the age, she initially said in his 40s, but then changed her mind and said she didn't actually know. As for Darlene's recollection of the car, a blue car with a white pinstripe down the side. From these two eyewitness accounts, law enforcement sent out a description of the man to look for. A white guy in his mid-30s, roughly 6 feet tall with short brown hair, wearing a red nylon jacket, and driving a car that resembled a blue 1974 Ford Torino. It seems like investigators took those two descriptions and sort of combined them, and then sent that description out to the public through the media to generate tips. And they did. A few weeks after Kelly's murder, law enforcement received a call. The tipster said they knew someone who fit the description. He was a 6-foot-tall white man with brown hair and a medium build. He drove a 2-door blue car resembling the Ford Torino witnesses claimed the man drove. And he lived in Laverne, where Kelly's body was found. His name was Gary. Now, Gary was obviously already on the investigators' radar when the photo lineups were presented to the two witnesses. Yet, when they both identified him as resembling the guy they saw, the investigation pivoted. Donald was never spoken with again, and officers set their sights on Gary. There was another reason for their strengthening suspicions. Rock County Sheriff's Deputy Kurt Kester saw Gary at the gravel pit the day they retrieved Kelly's body. He was known to local law enforcement. He had a history of charges and convictions, ranging from larceny to aggravated assault. Gary was riding his bike when he went down to the gravel pit that day and asked Deputy Kester what was going on. Deputy Kester ignored him. He had other things to worry about. And the scene began to draw spectators, locals who followed the line of squad cars and the sound of police sirens. Deputy Kester did not think anything of Gary at the time. He was among the many bystanders. But the call from the tipster, weeks later, changed his perspective. Before they brought Gary in for questioning, they did some digging. Gary was friends with the owner of the Frontier Bar, Charlie Johnston. So there was a connection. But bartenders told investigators he wasn't a regular, and nobody recalled seeing him there on May 26th. And as for the car, Gary had been seen driving a blue 1976 Grand Marquis Mercury from time to time, and it did resemble a 74 Ford Torino, but it wasn't his. Records showed that the car belonged to his ex-wife, Rhonda. He said he bought the vehicle when they were married and she got it in the divorce. Rhonda was brought in for questioning, and here is what she had to say. Yes, she did loan Gary the car from time to time, mainly when he needed to take a woman to OB appointments in Sioux Falls. But on Saturday, May 26th, the day in question, Rhonda said Gary did not have her car. And she knew that because she drove to work that evening around 8 p.m. for her overnight shift as a caregiver. Rhonda had one coworker who worked when she didn't. They shared duties. And that coworker confirmed Saturday night was Rhonda's shift. As for the daytime, Gary did odd jobs. A friend backed up his story that he was cutting wood for a local client who had hired him in the past. Investigators did not quit there, though. There was still the question of the gravel pit. It did seem odd. Anyone who has watched any crime show knows killers do sometimes return to the scene, for whatever psychological reason that compels them. Gary, though, said he went to the gravel pit pond a lot. It was his fishing spot. He did not have his pole with when he biked over there on May 28th, though. He told investigators that was because he was just going to check and see if the fish were biting. Rhonda told agents that added up. Gary regularly rode his bike out to the pit to fish or check out the scene and conditions. For context, Gary and his ex-wife had a pretty rough divorce. From what I could tell from the file, there was a lot of fighting. Gary at one point was convicted for assault for hitting his wife, a crime that was committed in public. Yet officers noted in their report that she seemed to be eager to defend her ex-husband. Here's what BCA Agent Berg wrote in his report. It should be noted that during the interview, Mrs. Van Melsen seemed to be very defensive of her ex-husband, stating that he seemed to be much more stable now than when they were married. Also, when asked if she had ever seen Gary angry, she says no. But reminded about the assaults on her, she tries to rationalize them by saying that it was her fault and that he really didn't mean to hurt her anyway. Gary and Rhonda had a daughter together. She was 6 years old in 1984. During the interview with Agent Berg, Rhonda said something else that stood out. That Gary would come over to be with their daughter while she worked overnight shifts. But there was nothing in the file specifically about the evening of May 26th. Agents never asked Rhonda or Gary about May 27th or the early hours of May 28th. At that point in the investigation, investigators didn't seem to be buying anything Gary or Rhonda were saying. And plus, they had two witnesses who chose Gary out of a photo lineup. And the car? A match. So they moved forward and obtained the proper permission to seize and search the car. Okay, now there are a lot of photos from this search in the file. They seem to have ripped the car apart, taking anything they found inside. These are the items they found in the vehicle: a blanket, tissues, cigarette butts, strands of hair, and vacuum sweepings. All of the samples were sent to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension lab for testing. There was no sign of Kelly's missing bra, shirt, or underwear. And DNA analysis at the time was not advanced enough to extract DNA from a hair sample if it wasn't a root hair sample. So they did a microscopic comparison of the hair. They took the hair found in the car and compared it against the samples of hair taken from Kelly. They determined they were not a match. DNA technology at the time also wasn't up for the challenge of extracting any DNA from the other items, like the blanket, the nightgown, or the tissue. The items and samples collected from the vehicle were included among the long list of evidence that was handed over from the BCA to the Rock County Sheriff's Office in 1985. I know you might be thinking, it sounds like there was a lot of evidence in this case. That's promising, right? Well, don't worry. We'll get to all of that later in the series. After the search of the vehicle and the negative hair sample comparison, Gary was off the hook. Like with Donald's case, investigators never requested a blood sample from Gary. to compare against the semen sample collected during Kelly's autopsy. As I mentioned in part 1, forensic technology at the time was not able to extract a DNA profile from a semen sample, but it could determine ABO blood type, and from there, a suspect could be ruled out, or the case against them could be strengthened. And I want to tell you something I saw in the file recently, unrelated to Kelly's case in a way. The serial rapist, BCA agent Berg, said he had a gut feeling about who he believed could have been the person who killed Kelly, but didn't have any evidence to prove it. That man was convicted in part because semen found on his victim was tested. And based on that semen sample, they determined the source belonged to a type A secretor. And that incident, from which they pulled the semen sample, happened in March of 1985, less than 1 year after Kelly's death and autopsy. The forensic technology was around and was being used in Sioux Falls, where Kelly's autopsy took place. It just wasn't used in Kelly's case. We ran a background check on Gary, and from what we can tell, he is still alive. And we did everything we could to track him down. We even went to his Sioux Falls apartment, listed as his current address in the background check. I was joined by Jean, Jeff's wife. Safety in numbers, right? I spoke with Jean on the phone recently to talk through this experience. You there?
Yep.
Okay.
So
This is how it went down. I met Jean at a coffee shop near Gary's apartment in the fall of this year. We came up with a plan and headed down the street to his apartment building. The building wasn't exactly what we or I expected. Photos I saw online on Google Earth showed an old brick building, nothing fancy. Before we got there, I was actually nervous about going inside. An old, scary building, a once suspected killer, you understand. But when we got there, it was clear that renovations were going on. Old meets new. And the doors were locked. This was a secured building. We couldn't just waltz in, find apartment B, and knock on the door. So we had to get creative. We had Gary's name and the background report stating he lived in the apartment. And he had at least one defining characteristic. He was an older guy, close to 80. So when tenants came in or out, and there weren't many, we asked them if they knew Gary, an older man who lived in apartment B. Nobody knew Gary. And then we were connected with the new owners of the building. We provided Gary's first and last name. They were not willing to share the names of their tenants, old or new. Totally understandable. They would not, however, tell us if he did not live there. So, we went into a tattoo shop located on the first floor of the apartment building, accessible from the street. Maybe someone in there would know Gary. And whether it was coincidence or something more, what unfolded next seemed to fit eerily into the strange synchronicity of it all. I want to talk about the tattoo shop. As it was your idea to go into the tattoo shop. And so the tattoo shop was located on the ground level. You know, you can walk down the street and walk into the tattoo shop. Do you remember what it was called?
Tatties.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, you might hear us laughing a little here. We certainly weren't laughing at anyone, and it certainly is not meant to be disrespectful. We were just chuckling about the absurdity of the situation we found ourselves in. So we walked into Fatty's Tatties, as you do, and the owner was in there. And I think you spoke with him first.
I think so. I think we just kind of threw out there, hey, how long have you been here? Do you own your shop? You know, it kind of basic questions at first of just, have you been here for a while? And then he had said, yeah, he grew up down there and that he knew all about downtown. And that's kind of when we brought up, I think you had brought up then why we were there. And he was like, oh, are you here about the skull I found?
Yeah,
It's
which
like,
was, yeah, he said something like, yeah, he said something like he just threw out the fact that he had found a skull when he was
yes.
younger, and it was a woman's skull, and he kind of explained that, because of that experience, in part, he was into more of like gothic stuff. And so, of course, not everyone has found a skull, a human skull as a child. So we started asking him more questions, and he then said that they found out who the skull belonged to, and it was someone who he believed to be a young woman, a sex worker.
Yes.
So that was somewhat of a pretty large coincidence in and of itself, because it's like, well, oh wow, like we're actually here trying to find someone who was once considered a potential suspect in the murder of someone who was alleged to be a sex worker. So then we asked him, if they ever caught the guy, like what became of this. And he told us yes, and it was a guy named Mark Christensen. And we were both like, okay, that's interesting.
Mark Christensen. The light bulb went off in both of our heads. Jean and I went back to the coffee shop where we met earlier that day. I had my laptop, so we searched newspapers.com, an online news archive for Mark Christensen. Sure enough, a story popped up. He was convicted in 1989 for the murder of Georgianne Walking Bull, whose remains were found by a group of hunters, a father and his 2 young children, in Renner, a rural area just north of Sioux Falls. The last name of the father of the family who found her skull matched Larry's, the owner of the tattoo shop. His story was legitimate. And here's the rest of it. Georgianne went missing in 1986, but was never reported missing. Her remains were found in 1987 by Larry and his family, and pathologists determined they belonged to a woman in her early 30s, 31. Yet, because a missing persons report was never filed, law enforcement was at a loss. There was nobody in their local database of missing persons who fit that description. But in 1988, anthropologists created a composite drawing based on her skull, and it was sent out to the public. She was identified 1 week later. Mark Christensen was arrested and arraigned for Georgianne's murder in December of 1989. He was facing 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree manslaughter, and pleaded not guilty. That changed, though. 9 months after pleading not guilty, he admitted to killing Georgianne. In exchange for his guilty plea, the first-degree murder charge was dropped, and he was convicted of first-degree manslaughter. Investigators focused on Mark Christensen for Georgianne's murder in part because her remains were found north of Renner, on a rural road, near the area where a victim, a young female sex worker, escaped from Mark Christensen 12 months before Georgianne was found. The woman who escaped was 26 years old. She contacted authorities immediately and said Mark Christensen had tried to strangle her that night with a rope on a gravel road near Renner. She had marks on her neck to prove it. He was promptly arrested and charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault. The attempted murder charge was dropped in exchange for his confession. He told a circuit court judge that he had paid the young woman to perform sexual acts. he took her to the rural location for this, and when they were done, she asked if he would drive her home. But Mark Christensen got angry because he felt the young woman had not completed her part of the agreement. So he wrapped a rope around her neck and nearly killed her. He was convicted of aggravated assault and given a 6-month prison sentence. To clarify, he strangled the woman with a rope after he killed Georgianne. Mark Christensen. Wow. We pulled up Kelly's investigative file on my computer and did a search in the file for Mark's name. He was in there. Out of the 1,376 pages, his name was mentioned once. My work on this story was not done at that point, but I still don't know how I missed this. But then again, I do. He was mentioned once, and only in a transcript of an interview with a Frontier bartender in 1991 regarding an entirely different person of interest. In 1991, BCA agents were following a lead about a man from Laverne with a violent temper, whose wife called him in. She said he had made mention of Kelly. Kind of. He didn't confess to her, but basically, while warning his wife to be careful in Laverne, he said something like, "Just ask the girl who ended up in the gravel pit." The man fit 2 criteria. He was extremely violent. He had threatened to kill his wife, and she believed he was capable. He did not, however, have a blue car, and considering it was 1991, it was tough to track down an alibi. But his ex-wife did work at the Frontier. She started around 1984. Agents went to the Frontier bar in 1991 when they received the tip and interviewed his ex-wife about her ex-husband. He was violent. He had threatened to kill her, too. And she wouldn't put it past him to kill someone, especially back when he still drank. But she had never known him to hang around the Frontier bar. And when she was asked if anyone around the Frontier bar ever talked about what might have happened to Kelly, she had this to say. The owner, Charlie Johnston, told her he thought Mark Christensen killed her. And here is why. In 1984, around the time Kelly was killed, Mark Christensen sold flowers, bar to bar. Maybe you've seen these late-night salesmen before. They roll into the bar during the evenings, or at least they used to, and convince intoxicated men to buy flowers for the ladies. Mark Christensen did this at the Frontier bar, and at the end of the night, he would hand out the leftover flowers to the sex workers and dancers. What a lead. It should be noted that investigators did speak with Charlie, the owner of the Frontier bar, the month after Kelly went missing, and he didn't have much to say. But he didn't know in 1984 what he knew in 1991. As far as the file shows, investigators didn't speak with him again. In 1991, when investigators received this story, this theory, Mark Christensen was already in prison for killing Georgianne, an alleged sex worker. He admitted to it, and he admitted to wrapping a rope around another sex worker's neck. It nearly killed her. And like his 2 known victims, Kelly was taken to a rural area. Jean knows more about both of the areas than I do, Sioux Falls and Laverne. She's from around there. This is how she explained it.
I want to say that Del Rapids is where all the quarries are as well. So it's kind of a weirdly similar, it's weird in that same sense.
To clarify, the quarries she's talking about are accessible through the rural road where Mark Christensen took both of his victims. Other than road hunting, which Larry and his family were doing, it's really only used and known by those who take the route to the quarry.
It's a traffic area in the sense of, the quarry and the back roads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so they were both in areas that were not well known.
Not as, this one would have been more well known than the Laverne, but yeah.
With all of the similarities, the suspicions, surely law enforcement went to the prison to speak with Mark Christensen about Kelly. It's hard to believe that nobody did, but there is nothing in the file. No more mention of Mark Christensen. No interview transcripts, no alibi, no report summarizing an in-person meeting. Nothing. This one is hard to accept. BCA agents O'Gorman and Berg were no rookies. They were experienced detectives who handled murder cases. It's confusing. They have both long since been retired and they're tough to track down, understandably. But if I could speak with them, I'd have a long list of questions. And this one would be close to the top. Did they investigate Mark Christensen and, for whatever reason, it didn't get put in the report? That seems unlikely, considering the report is detailed from 1984 all the way up to 2009, when they followed up with a tip that didn't pan out. But anything is possible. And if they did look into Mark Christensen, there would be more than just one interview transcript missing. They'd have to vet his alibi, which means interviewing others, friends, coworkers, family members. I wondered if he was still in prison. So I looked him up in the South Dakota Prison Inmate Registry, and I found his name. His description was given too. A white male, brown hair, blue eyes, 6'3". It also gave his discharge date, the date he was released from prison, December 27th, 2022. He's out there. We ran a background check. As you can imagine, there was a long list of nothing from 1989 until 2022. And the only address given, listed as active, was for a homeless shelter in Sioux Falls. I called the shelter, and they would not tell me anything. Understandable. I thought maybe, though, I could give them a note for him, Mark, and I could maybe call back to see if he had a response. But no, they said the only way would be for me to give them my name and phone number, along with a short message that they would hang up on the community billboard in the shelter. No, thank you. Thankfully, Jean lives nearby and offered to go down to the shelter to see if she could maybe spot Mark. At the time of his release, he was 364 pounds, so we figured he'd stand out.
You were also looking for, he was a pretty big guy. So someone you thought, maybe he'll stand out enough to where you could literally just see him standing in line.
Yes, I absolutely thought that. And that's when I walked up to what I thought was maybe possibly him. But that person was definitely in size, from what I understand of what this guy was, very similar in size, but he is probably 20 years too young.
Nothing. I have a feeling it will take law enforcement actively getting involved in this case again to find him. As I've mentioned before, this case file was robust. They looked into a lot of people. It turns out there were a lot of men from Laverne or with connections to Laverne who were violent, mostly to women, their wives, girlfriends. That was the sad reality of Sioux Falls and Laverne in 1984. We are not going to go over every single individual they looked into. For the sake of this series, we've highlighted the individuals law enforcement considered to be top potential suspects, and at least one we thought should have or could have been a person of interest, Mark Christensen. And with these three individuals in mind, I would like to move on to the topic of evidence. Because there was a lot. Now, this is a long list, but for the sake of this story, it is important to hear. This is, in summary, the evidence. Individual bags containing the following: Kelly's shoes, Kelly's jeans, Kelly's jacket, Kelly's socks. Then, the BCA rape kit, including the semen sample taken from Kelly's anal cavity. A test tube containing fluid taken from Kelly's eye during the autopsy. A jar containing the tampon removed during the autopsy. Beer cans and candy wrappers found near Kelly's shoes. A piece of a handwritten note found in Kelly's apartment. A fingerprint card with Kelly's fingerprints. The plastic bag that originally contained Kelly's clothes. Rolls of film taken of the crime scene and Kelly's apartment. Soil from the Sioux Falls river bottoms, as sand in her jacket pockets didn't match the type of sand at the gravel pit. A plastic bag containing a bottle of Kelly's urine. And all of the evidence collected from Gary's wife's vehicle, including the bag, tissues, cigarette butts, strands of hair, and vacuum sweepings. That's a lot. Certainly more than any missing persons case from the 1970s and 1980s could ever hope for. With current forensic technology, there was enough evidence in this case to solve it, many times over. Cold cases are being solved all the time now, even dating back to the 70s with advances in DNA technology. And this is where I want to tell you one of the most distressing parts of this already heartbreaking story. The BCA confirmed with us that the samples and evidence mentioned above were returned to the Rock County Sheriff's Office 40 years ago. The sheriff at the time, Ollie Holman, signed for the receipt of this evidence on April 4th, 1985. So, where is it now? We'll explore that in part 3. Interested in checking out images from the case file and Kelly's family? You can find a link to our site in the show notes. If you are looking for a simple way to support the work we do at The Vault, leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts. It helps give the podcast search visibility, which means more coverage for the cases we cover. The Vault is a Forum Communications podcast. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. Thank you for listening.